So welcome to MU 307 Woodwind Methods second class of our online service. And we will talk to Mr. Vaught here about the bassoon and do some things here. We want to continue with what we talked about the last class. We went through some overview of the instrument. And now, first of all, how did you get interested in playing the bassoon? I know you play multiple instruments, so I won't harp on you about
it. Well, I think mostly because nobody else was playing it, and there was kind of a need. I started when I was a sophomore here at the college, and I played clarinet first, and it's like clarinet and sax tend to be the easier ones to switch from. At least that's what they tell me. So, and then I always thought it was kind of an interesting, kind of weird instrument. You know, it gets your attention if you're aware of it, in the orchestra and stuff. So, I don't know. I just kind of felt like we needed someone to play, and I was interested in learning. So,
okay,
why not?
That's exciting. So, let's begin talking through just assembling the instrument. Now we know your instrument, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to adjust this music stand so everybody can kind of see what you do. On the PowerPoint that I talked about, starting with the wing joint and the bass joint or the long joint.
So it's 4 parts, right? You break down the bassoon in 4 parts. And we have the wing and the bass, and they fit together side by side because the bassoon's like a U-shaped instrument. And a lot of people will actually hold them together and put them into the boot joint like that. I personally do it one at a time because I'm clumsy, so just less risk. I always take the boot joint first, and it's got the two holes in the top for the 2 joints. And I'll hold it this way, and I'll actually put the wing joint in first. And what you want to be really careful to do is there's a bridge key where the whisper key connects to the pancake on the boot joint, and I'll actually put my thumb on that whisper key to keep the bridge keys from smashing together and make sure it's lined up correctly that way first. And then you can let go of that, and you can see how the pancake key on the boot joint will control the whisper key when your left thumb is busy doing all the other things it has to do. So I'll put that on first, and then that works pretty well because then you can line up the long joint and you can make sure they're lined up pretty well before you push it in. And I'll actually set it on the floor to do that, or on a chair, either way. And then you have a lock that connects the 2 joints together. You can make sure that that hole is lined up before you put the lock in place. And that way, they're pretty well lined up. Because if you try to do them both at the same time, you can, but they're kind of turn around and slip around on you.
Do you mind holding it forward a little bit?
Yeah.
I wonder if the camera can kind of pick up where that lock joint is right up here on the top. Maybe play with it a little bit so they can see that.
And it connects right in the top, right there. So it goes up and down, and there's just a little tiny hole close to where the vocal goes in, and it locks them together just like that. Most bassoons have it. Actually, the very first bassoon I started on, the black plastic one, the school ones, it actually snaps together just like a snap-on clothes or something, instead of having this spring lock that goes up and down. And then the bell goes on last, and again, there's a bridge key. The very lowest note, the B flat, is the only one on the bell. So what I'll do is I'll just put my thumb and hold down that B flat key, and then just put the bell on and make sure the bridge key is lined up.
And you still want to use a slight twisting motion, just careful, but...
And right now the weather's been pretty dry, so the wood isn't super difficult, but when it gets really humid, you have to make sure that the joints you have some cork grease, because if it suddenly gets humid, I've had it swell where I can't pull the bell off.
Now the article I read said canning wax is better because cork grease
Yeah.
pulls dirt in, but
So,
with those threaded joints.
Yeah, and this bassoon, only the wing joint has cork. The other two are string tenons. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think maybe the cork one was put on later. I think somebody just wrapped it with cork after the string wore out. But
Okay.
I think they were probably all string originally because they're usually all one or the other.
Yeah,
But I don't know.
typically.
So that's the main body put together, you know, and the long U shape, right, where the air has to pass through from the top all the way down the boot and then back up through the long.
Now, do you use a hand rest?
I do because I have larger hands, so I have my hand rest here on my stand. This is just a regular plastic one, probably came with this bassoon. And different people use them different ways. I've talked to a lot of bassoonists. Normally, you put it on with the kind of bulb-shaped part up toward the top, and it connects into the boot. And there's a little screw you can use to tighten it down. Most people will use it this way, so there's that curve. I actually use it the other way. I like to have this part down because the way my hand is kind of larger, it lets me kind of pivot better when I'm doing stuff down here. And I've talked to several other bassoonists that do it that way. I've talked to just as many who do it this way. And actually, if you're a player with really small hands, I've talked to a lot of ladies that play the bassoon, they actually won't use it at all. When we had the Dakota group for fine arts, she didn't use one. She said never, just because her hands are so small, it puts her hand too far away from the body of the instrument.
So even small hands, the finger spread on the holes is not
Yeah.
too wide for small hands.
Not too difficult, but that adds a good 1.5 inches up from the body, so if your player has smaller hands, it'll put their hand too far out. So they'll need to probably not use the hand rest, but it really depends on the player, exactly how you want to use it or set it up. The most important thing is that you have a comfortable resting position and that you can reach all the keys. That's really,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, good. Now, I noticed you have a different vocal.
I do,
So
because
if you could show them a standard vocal.
so I have my vocal case, 2 that came with the instrument, a number 1 and number 2, and then I also have a size 0, which is slightly longer, and then I actually started using a couple of years ago a straight vocal at a 90-degree angle. And as far as I know, these are just made by the Wolf company in Germany. And I did that because of my height. Because when you have the vocals on the instrument, they curve down normally. Let's see, I'll just put in the 0, show you guys. So if it's right at the top, and you want to be careful not to put the pressure on this side because you can bend it and break it. So I always pinch. Mr. Kozar knows that's happened to me before. I've had to send vocals in for repair. I pinch closer to that little hole that the whisper key needs to cover up, which is more or less your octave key. And then when I have it set up that way, the 0 vocal, since I'm taller, I have to pull the C strap way up, and then the bassoon is really high when I use a normal vocal. And that's because I'm 6 foot tall. That's fine if you're, 5.5 feet tall or 5 feet tall. It's nice and short, and it'll come right up to the mouth. But for me, that puts the bassoon way up high, and my arms are up higher to be, or too high to really be comfortable. Yeah, swap out there. So I use my straight vocal. It works really well for me, mostly just because of my height. And that way I can have it lower where generally you want the top of the boot to be right at the hip so that your right arm is in a resting position there. And then that puts, because of this straight vocal for my height, that puts it pretty much right where it needs to be. And you can adjust which angle the vocal turns so that the instrument is, the keys are set up where your thumbs are on the side closer to your body.
Now, since you're talking about adjustment, we talked about the seat strap adjustment.
Yeah.
He's sitting on the seat strap, which is just like a belt, and then it's hooked at the bottom of the bassoon. He adjusts the height of the bassoon so that the vocal comes right to his mouth. That's ideal. So maybe just show us real quick, let it adjust lower, and then he just stands up.
Just kind of let it slide out from under you a little bit, and it'll go lower. And then the part that sticks out on the left, you just pull, kind of have to, pull it to wherever you think is right. That's about right for me. So, and what I did, most bassoons have holes on the bottom for the hook on the seat strap. But what I did, I actually took a key ring and added it to the boot. And that it's a much easier thing to hook in and out of if you have to move quickly. Like, when they've had me, when the conductor's ready to go and I've been resting for 80 measures, it happens in symphony, and I need to put it on really quickly. It's a lot easier to get it in that key ring fast. And then at the end of performance, they'll have you stand up, bow, sit back down, play the next piece, right? So it's just easier that way for me, so I added that key ring myself.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and set that on the stand temporarily. I think the vocal should be safe there.
Yep.
And let's start with the reed. So let's talk a little bit about how you prep the reed. He has a little cup of water that he keeps with him.
Yeah, keep it in my bag. But a lot of people, this is super old, but you know what that is?
35 millimeter.
It's an old film canister from several years ago. I used this for quite a while. It's probably really dirty. It's been in the case for a long time, but you can get just any little cup of water because the reed needs to be wet before it'll be able to vibrate freely and make a good sound. If you try to play with a dry reed, you're just going to get a really scratchy, gross, kind of croaky sound. So I usually put them in for about a minute before I start to play. I'll actually put the reed in the water first and then put the instrument together. And by the time I'm done with that, it's probably ready to go.
Now the sound that we make on typically a mouthpiece instrument, woodwind, or even brass, we use a certain pitch. But what do we call the sound that you make on the reed? It has like a bird name.
So the basic sound of the reed is called the crow, just like the bird, right, a crow. And a bassoon crow is supposed to ideally be 3 tones, a high, middle, and low, sounding at the same time. It's not beautiful. And you kind of get your upper and your lower kind of sounding at the same time.
So it almost sounds
the basic
gravelly.
idea. It's going to sound gravelly. Yeah, it's a rough sound when it's just a reed all by itself.
If the reed just sounds one pitch, that's not a good reed.
That's not particularly good because that means you're not really getting all the vibrations you need for all the overtones. So
we kind of call it a dirty crow reed.
Or if you're only hearing one pitch, it may be that your wires are too tight and only one reed is really vibrating, the other one's being choked off. There can be all kinds of issues with reeds.
All right. Wow. All right. So that's exciting. So you would, after you get it moist and then you crow it, make sure it's doing what it's supposed to, then it's kind of ready for performance.
Pretty much ready to go. Yeah.
Why don't you real quick show them the other reed, that the synthetic?
Okay. Yeah. So I have a bunch of traditional reeds that I've made myself. And a lot of bassoonists make their own reeds because it's a lot cheaper than buying them already made, and you can cater them to your own specific, the shape of your mouth, the needs that you have. But I also have 2 synthetic reeds, and they work pretty well. They're getting a little old, so the edges are getting chipped, but they still sound, and they're actually pretty well in tune, surprisingly. Synthetic reeds have come a long way in the past decade, Just in the past 10 years or so, they went from being kind of like, don't use it unless you really have to now you've got some pretty good options that are pretty solid. They are expensive compared to normal reeds, but you only have to buy them once, and then they'll last for, I mean, I've had these 5-6 years now, and they're still working, versus if you're buying regular reeds already made, they're $15-20 each every few months or so. So you just kind of have to weigh the cost.
Real quick, what is something that you notice with a reed that you know, okay, this reed is not good anymore, or I need to get rid of it?
When it starts to not respond quickly, it feels really sluggish. That's usually the first sign for me that I can't get it to speak the way that I could. A lot of times at that point, I can try a couple things to tweak it first before I just throw it away. But eventually, it's going to have a very dull, sluggish sound, mostly because the fibers have started to break down, that's what your saliva does, right? It breaks things down before you eat food. So it's doing that to the reed over days and days and weeks. So eventually, it will wear the reed out. So you'll need to get a new one. Or if it chips and breaks, sometimes the edges will chip. This one actually has a slight chip in the edge, but not in the part that sounds, so it's still okay. But if it moves over a little bit more, I'll end up needing a new reed. So,
Okay.
yeah.
We talked about the pancake key, which again is that it looks like a pancake, so it's a little round key at the bottom. Which hand is that? Your right hand?
Yeah. That's the largest one.
So give Tom a minute to hone in on the pancake. So it looks like a round pancake key. And again, your thumb on that and the right hand works 4 different keys, but I think it spends a good amount of time on that pancake key. So it's not as daunting as it looks for that hand. We won't talk about the left thumb. It's a workout.
Yep.
But I believe there's 9 keys for that one.
Yeah.
The whisper key.
That's right here.
So the button is
On the left thumb.
Yeah, it's your bottom key of the left thumb. And that's the one that opens all the way up at the top that we said had to be careful.
Yeah, it closes
on the vocal.
This tiny little, very like a pinprick sized hole on the vocal. When it's closed, you want it closed for your low octave, but having that little vent open, that helps your high notes come out. So you'll keep the thumb on it playing low notes. And some bassoons actually have a lock where it'll keep the whisper key locked down, but you got to remember to slide it open and close. So I don't bother with one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. That gets us there. We won't get too deep into half hole, but which finger again is it?
That's the left index finger, which is this very top hole right here.
And do you it looks like you slide your
Slide
finger down,
it down,
you don't roll
just
it?
a little bit. I slide. Let me put it on here.
So I don't know, Tom, if you can get close to this top left hand index finger.
Yep. So you have it covered, and then I just slide down. Yep.
And it's just a little muscle memory, realizing and listening to hear if the note's speaking. Because if you don't half hole enough, it won't even respond.
Nope.
And if you do it too much, it's going to act like you uncovered the hole. So
Right.
it's a real long process technique of muscle memory and just knowing physically how to adjust for that. Are there any notes on the bassoon? For example, we probably tune to a concert B flat, but I think the bassoon, is that a bad note on the bassoon? So
Not
your band
particularly.
concert B flat, or is it
B
consistent?
flat or A, you can tune either way. They're both pretty consistent.
Is there any really bad notes on the bassoon that you have to voice or adjust or use alternate fingering for?
The C sharp, D flat in the middle of the bass clef, that's usually pretty badly out of tune. You have to do some alternate fingerings. And That can depend on your instrument. Different makes, different models will play it in tune with certain alternate fingerings. Might be better on this one or that one. And then the F sharp, right near the top of the bass clef is your F sharp, and then all your high notes get really finicky with intonation, but that's usually more advanced stuff to get up into the extended range.
So low register notes are pretty locked. I mean,
pretty solid.
If the instrument's tuned to 440, it is 440.
Yeah. With the only low note that can give you trouble is the low D, right down at the under the bass clef.
Oh,
like really low D. Yeah, it tends to dip flat. But
so how do you fix
not
that?
terrible. A lot of it is going to be you anticipate it with your embouchure tightened up just slightly to raise pitch.
You do a little voicing too with your
and then,
inside your mouth cavity?
Yeah, for any of the low notes you have a very round, open, I imagine that there's a big bubble at the back of the mouth, right? All your low notes are going to be very open throat, very open mouth. And sometimes you can use that low D and E flat right there to actually test whether your reed is going to be in tune. Those are kind of really good test notes. If they're really flat, it's probably a reed problem and not an instrument problem.
Okay.
So those are good notes to check.
Okay. Vibrato. Can you just briefly talk about that?
So there's two different major ways that bassoon players use vibrato, and there's pros and cons for both ways, and it's one of those things people will be pretty firmly in one camp or the other, it seems like. So there's jaw vibrato, where you form it by actually moving the jaw up and down on the note. And then there's also the diaphragmatic, the same that most flute players use. That's the way that I do it because I think I have more experience with singing background and choral conducting, and I did all that, so that kind of vibrato is really similar to what singers use. So for me, that makes a lot of sense. But you can get a decent vibrato either way. So let's just take C. If I straight tone it, you kind of get the truck horn sound, right? But vibrato is always going to make bassoon really stand out and not just sound like a kind of dull sounding note. That's the diaphragmatic vibrato. I hardly ever use jaw vibrato, so I'm going to try. I don't know how well it'll go. To me, I don't have as much control over that. It feels really too wide to me, but it kind of just depends on the player, what they're able to do comfortably. If I have a lot of jaw tension, that's one of my biggest problems. So for me, adding jaw vibrato on top of that is another thing that really makes me tense and affects my tone quality, right? How in tune I am. So it doesn't work as well for me.
I think there's probably cons of both that are bad. Like
right.
If you use jaw vibrato, then we have issues with the embouchure moving and things. But then some people will also say with diaphragmatic, you're messing with the breathing and the airflow. So, but I also think it needs to be a natural process. And whatever's comfortable, whatever works for you, that your vibrato's not too fast either, or too slow or whatever, that it just sounds natural. I think both of them could work, but I think diaphragmatic is probably best.
Yeah.
But that's a preference for the player.
Yeah.
Seen both. If you could play a scale for me, just pick an easy scale, and then I think if the camera can hone in on your fingers so everybody can kind of see what your fingers are doing as you're going up the scale, and you'll see the pattern like with the other instruments where we have 3 fingers in each hand. The bassoon, we kind of have 4 fingers on each hand on the front, and I know the thumb's going to do stuff and the camera won't be able to see that.
So I'll do an F scale because then I only have 1 thumb note, so everything else will be on the front of the instrument. Just the B flat is these 3 fingers together, right down. Everything else should be on the front, be able to see. So.
And so that helps us see that basically the pattern with all the other woodwind family is that you pick up one finger at a time, almost like the recorder or flutophone or any of those instruments. They all work on the same principle: the flute, clarinet, saxophone. And this is part of what's called the Heckel fingering system, since this is a Fox instrument, and you know, the fingerings are going to be pretty standardized, and that's what we have with modern instruments. So the bassoon has come a long way.
Yeah. And most of your Heckel system bassoons have all the same fingerings. That's what we call German bassoons, and they're pretty much 95% of all bassoons. There are French bassoons, and they're totally different. I've never seen one. They have a slightly different sound, but the fingering systems are totally different for French bassoons, but they're not very common. Pretty much only in Europe. I've never seen one personally. I've listened to some recordings of pieces played on the standard German bassoon or French, but you probably won't have to worry about it because they're really rare.
So just check on your instrument. Know your instrument. If you come into a small school and they have bassoons, look at them, see who made them, and find out about them before you give them to a student and they find out that fingering doesn't work, or it sounds weird. Something's wrong with my bassoon. And you think you spent money to repair, and it's not really a repair. So, did you find something in here?
Yeah, the first couple ones actually look pretty good.
Okay. I'm just going to have them play like a hymn. I'm going to give you something lyrical. Take my life and let it be. And just, can you see it all right?
Yeah, I can see
it turn
pretty
that way.
well.
You just,
All right.
is this getting away?
And be able to.
All right, so you can hear this little bit of vibrato incorporated in a hymn, and just to see.
I want to see which. Should I do the higher or the?
I think melody is over here, but
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, it's an octave, so I didn't know which octave you wanted me to play in. So
maybe do a little bit in the low octave.
Yeah. I'll start on the low one first, and this so it's an F. So.
Tone difference in the upper register. So that gives us an idea of tone colors and different sounds that we can get from the bassoon. I noticed too that you had to do several half hold with your index finger on your left hand. So
the G natural is our half hold note.
Is that fourth space?
Right, at the top of the bass clef. So that's our one half hold note in this key.
Okay. All right. Well, that gives us a good idea of actually the sounds that we can do something lyrical. There's a little solo here, Minuet, Grace for a Fresh Egg by Herbert Howells, and maybe pick a little bit.
All right,
I'm making them sight read
some
here.
stuff.
Yeah, this is my.
And this is in bass clef for the most part, but it does switch to tenor clef in the middle of the page, which is not too terrible. But when you do start a bassoonist, try to get them not scared of tenor clef as soon as possible because I waited really late because I was kind of intimidated by it.
a majority of what you do is bass clef.
Yeah, pretty
as a
much
bassoonist.
almost everything. But if you do end up playing things from Beethoven onward till about 1900, it'll be tenor clef pretty regularly. And then for some reason, from about 1900 forward in the modern era, they just kind of write bass clef with lots of ledger lines instead. I don't know. So,
Wow.
but yeah, so
Okay,
I'll sight read some of this.
maybe
I guess.
just the first 2 or 3 lines. Don't even
Okay.
get into the tenor.
Interesting.
See, that's got some contrast in the upper and lower registers.
Right.
So.
And then it goes pretty high in the next line with the tenor clef. It goes up to a high G. So we'll get some interesting high notes up there.
So just exploring some different things. Is there anything else about the bassoon that, beside its unusual sound, again, every note has a different fingering, and those different fingerings can have multiple alternate fingerings that have purpose.
Yeah. For example, some of the notes I just played on this bassoon, because I've been playing on this one for several years, I know several notes that come out kind of iffy, like that C sharp I mentioned before. If I play it just the standard fingering you'll see listed, but on this bassoon I usually add the first pinky key on the left hand. It's in the low range, that's your E flat key. But if you add it to any upper range notes, we call it the resonance key, because it does open up that sound a lot, makes it a lot freer and usually more in tune. I add it for G, top space, bass clef, the half whole note, because without it,
It actually pulls the pitch down slightly.
yeah, because once you get out of above F in the second line, bass clef F, across what we call across the break, most notes are going to tend to go sharp instead of flat. And so adding that resonance key really helps to stabilize and pull the pitch down. So.
You can hear it. It resonates more. I'm not sure if the camera's really picking up, but I'm sitting right next to you and I can hear the tone quality just fill out.
And pretty much all your high range notes above E, the E right above middle C, pretty much always add the resonance key for all those. And it's gonna
And the
help to
resonance key
stabilize
is it's an E flat key or D sharp.
yeah,
key.
at the bottom underneath the bass clef, it is your standard fingering for your low E flat, but then pretty much across the break and above, it's the resonance key.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Good. That's exciting. So, well, thank you very much.
No problem.
We really enjoyed, and
Yep.
and if we had a live class, we'd have open for
Yeah.
some questions. But
That's all good.
your email? No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Get inundated with questions. So, anything else you want to share before we wrap
I
up?
can't think of anything else. It's just a fun, really quirky instrument. If you like a challenge for your ear and for especially your thumbs, it's a good choice.
Just
yeah.
curious, a top of the line Fox Renard. This is one of what's called Fox
Yeah,
Renard
Fox
brand.
is a great brand.
Top of the line bassoon. Just a regular. We're not even talking contra bassoon. Just a regular.
So
one.
regular, like really nice pro model bassoon is probably going to run you $15,000 to $20,000 now, right? This is a good student model, and I looked up recently. This exact model is about $7,500. So
Okay, that's
Yeah.
not.
compared to a pro, that's going to be like buying a car.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
The intermediate, the student models are good quality. Like I've played all kinds of symphonic literature on it. No trouble really. I've never The only key I really lack is a high trill key that I've only needed, I think, once in 10 years, and I may do without it. So, yeah.
Wow, great. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, no
for
problem.
giving your time there.